Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it will be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. I reported my former landlord to the IRS for tax fraud as revenge for him making up lies on me to keep my deposit. I am glad he lost his freaking house. I found this guy on Craigslist a few years ago. I like renting condos from private owners as opposed to renting apartments. Typically, by renting a condo, it is safer. You have more caring residents, you get to have a luxury apartment-style home with all the amenities, and you can negotiate pricing and so on. I'm an excellent tenant, and anyone who I have rented from will tell you that. I paid a $1,000 deposit to move into this guy's condo. I was on a year lease, and he lives in another state, but we were in the same time zone. On month 8 of my lease, I came home to a door that wouldn't open. I couldn't get the door unlocked, and I had 2 keys on me. As much as I tried to turn them, I couldn't. One of the keys even broke in the lock. I waited 2 hours. I called, texted, and emailed my landlord, and he did not pick up. I thought maybe he had someone to change the locks for some reason. I honestly didn't know what to think and had no one to help me. The lady who lived across from me saw me in distress as she was going into her apartment. I had never seen her, but she asked me if I were okay, and I explained to her that I couldn't get into my apartment. She told me that she knows of an on-call locksmith, and she gives me his number. I tell her thanks and reach out to my landlord a few more times, and no response. I had no choice but to call the locksmith, plus I had to be so bad. The locksmith arrived and couldn't get the door unlocked with my key. He says he can replace the lock for like $100. I told him I was renting a condo and couldn't get in touch with the owner and didn't know when would be the next time I could get in touch with him. After he took the lock off, he told me it was faulty. So he replaced the lock. I told the landlord this via email and text and voicemail, and I told him that I could send him copies of the keys if he wanted. Okay, so fast forward to the end of my lease. I demand that he does a walkthrough with me. He said he wouldn't. I told him that if he didn't do a walkthrough, I would be notifying the condo office, as he did not have permission to sublease by the association. He then had a friend to serve as his proxy to come meet me and walk through the unit. The place was spotless. I know how to clean. I took multiple photos and videos and showed his proxy the unit, who is a police officer. Actually, they were both police officers who used to work together. We both literally tested all the appliances, faucets, checked the blinds, carpets, hardwood, everything. His proxy gave me the okay and said that everything looked great. I gave his proxy the keys and later that night left for my new city. So fast forward to a month later. I haven't heard from him about my deposit. He ignored all of my emails and phone calls. And he finally gets back with me 2 months after I moved out and has all this ridiculous made-up stuff about how I damaged his unit. Broken blinds, scratches on the hardwood floor. He made it seem like I damaged his door by getting the lock replaced. He said there were scratches on the outside of his door. Rust here and there, broken dishwasher, broken sink, oven was broke, and broken dryer. What the heck? Just all freaking lies. I would never leave a unit in that condition. He sent me an itemized list of all the charges that magically came out to be $1,000. The same as my deposit. Exactly. He was always planning to keep my money. He wanted that money to either ball on it or upgrade his condo. I hated him. I decided I wasn't going to go to court because I had moved to a different state and lived alone. But I thought of something. He rented to me under the table. and likely did not claim my rent payments as earned income. I had all my wire transfers on my bank statement. I had his routing and account number and a copy of his driver's license, as we agreed to swap IDs when I signed the lease to make sure I wasn't getting scammed. I found his out-of-state address online, gathered all my bank statements, gathered his bank account numbers, and made a report with the IRS. About a few years later, I checked up on things and that jerk lost his condo and lost everything he owned in bankruptcy. I paid for and downloaded his court records and saw proof that he lost everything including his condo, cars, and had his bank account seized. I'm not sure if he has gone to jail or anything, but I'm just so glad that that man got what he deserves. Screw him and anyone who calls him a friend. He can rot for all I care. Next story. Karen gets rudely and loudly shot down. Once again, I have an adventure to tell you all about a trip to a store that has a name that rhymes with small fart. There is me, my son, I shall call son, entitled Karen, we will call her Karen, and the store employee and the manager. Today, a few hours ago, my son took me to a small fart to do some shopping. Shopping itself was uneventful for the most part until the Karen of the story came into the picture. My son was doing his job and helping his mother and me shop by getting things down off a shelf and placing them in a cart as I'm permanently wheelchair bound. I was reading off a list of shopping and he was getting the items. We stopped a moment in the frozen food section. He retrieved an item or two on my list and put them in the cart. At that moment, we stopped shopping for a moment while I took out an inhaler. I have troubles breathing at times. And that's when we heard a loud snapping of fingers and a loud, rude ahem. Then the dreaded loud voice,
"Now that you're done helping her, you can help me with my shopping."
My son turned. I don't work here, lady. I was and am shopping with my mother. You want help? Go find an actual employee and just go away.
"You work here,"
she screeched.
"Otherwise you wouldn't be helping her shop."
Again, lady, I don't work here. Want help? Go find an employee and stop bothering us. She started yelling,
"I'm getting you fired. Manager! Manager!"
At her yelling, an employee came to see what the yelling was about and asked if she could help.
"Yes!"
She deliberately dragged out the S on the word.
"Your employee has been extremely rude and threatened me when I asked for help."
The employee looked confused. Ma'am, he doesn't work here.
"Yes, he does. We're just trying to cover for him now. Go get me your manager, now."
She walked over to a post and pressed the red button on a display on it. Manager needed in frozen food aisle. She said into the speaker also on the post. Be right there. A voice said back.
"Now we'll see how long you're employed here."
The Karen said that she stood there with a smug look on her face. Before long, the manager arrived. Before he could even ask what was going on, the Karen launched into a heavily embellished tale, painting herself as a victim and demanding compensation for the horrible insults she had endured and demanding both my son and the employee be fired immediately. "I remember you," the manager suddenly said. "You're banned from the store if I remember correctly," but got interrupted by her screeching. The response of the manager was a wonder to behold and caught us all by surprise. "Shut up," he yelled at the Karen. "This is the second time and the reason you were banned for 6 months to begin with, harassing other customers and making up wild tales and trying to get one of my employees fired." She opened her mouth but the manager beat her to it. "I said shut up. Now leave your cart where it is and get the hell out of my store. And don't ever set foot in it again, or I will trespass you and have you jailed." She stood there mouth flapping. "I said get the hell out, now, or shall I call the police and have you escorted out the front door in cuffs?" The Karen took off running as if the devil himself had come in pursuit of her. It was an unbelievable but very satisfying thing to have witnessed. The manager turned to us and said, "I'm so sorry you had to endure that and hear me yelling, but she had that coming. And that is not the first time she had harassed other shoppers. Please allow me to do something for you for your troubles." When we left, we not only had our shopping come 25% at his insistence, although we told him it was not necessary, we were each given a $50 gift card to use as we see fit on our next visit to the store. And I have a new hero to enjoy talking to whenever I go shopping there again. Next story. That is not your car, lady. So this happened around 2008. My buddy Brock had gotten out of the military after 10 years. He'd started in the Marines but transitioned into the Army for the last 4 years before buying a house in Texas. When he got out, he did a variety of jobs before landing a gig with a reposition service. He worked there for a year and had a lot of wild stories, but this one sticks out the most as he helped a fellow soldier get revenge on an evil ex. Brock was at the office speaking with his manager, whom I refer to as Karen. Now, this particular Karen had a lot of Karen-like qualities, but was a force for good if you can believe that. But she was a force for good if you can believe that. While they were talking, they saw a young man enter the office. They immediately noticed he had 2 black eyes and an arm was in a sling. The young man, whose name I unfortunately never learned but I will call Ben, asked how hard it would be for them to help repossess his car. Karen called her daughter in, Karen Jr., and had her pour Karen a cup of coffee. Karen then asked Ben to tell her his story. Ben began with telling her that he had just returned from a deployment. He had been dating a local girl that lived outside of the famous Fort Hood. Not a good idea, by the way. That was before the deployment. Thanks to a previous deployment, he had managed to get himself a used black Dodge Charger, which was his baby. He further explained that shortly after buying the car, he had met the local girl, who for the sake of the story I will call Morgan. Morgan was always asking to drive his car, but he would always decline. When he was getting ready for his deployment, Morgan repeatedly asked if she could borrow the car, but he kept saying no. After much needling, he relented, but on the condition that she takes care of his apartment until he comes back from rest and relaxation leave. And she agreed. Ben left for his deployment while Morgan took care of his place. When Ben came back for leave, he found his apartment immaculate. He pulled his car from storage, drove to Morgan's, and he spent a few days with her before handing her the keys and heading to his home state to visit family before returning to his deployment. He returned again from his deployment and found nothing but trouble. When he walked into his apartment, he found a layer of dust on just about every surface. It was almost like no one had been there in months. When he checked his bedroom, he'd found his room had been torn apart. All of his drawers had been searched and upturned. He tried to call Morgan but never received an answer. He located his safe, which was hidden, and found it hadn't been touched. He then grabbed his spare key from his safe, called a buddy of his, and they went to Morgan's. As they pulled up to Morgan's, he saw a car there that he initially did not recognize. But as they got closer, he realized it was his baby. Morgan had the car painted hot pink and put 24-inch spinners on it. He tried the key just to make sure and the lights flickered as it unlocked. While his buddy laughed, Ben went to the front door and Morgan answered. He asked what happened to his car and she responded, "It is my car now." Ben walked away and hopped in his hot pink mess. As he started it, 4 large dudes came out of Morgan's house. One with a baseball bat and yanked Ben out of his car. They proceeded to beat the crap out of him in a driveway before his friend intervened, pulling his concealed carry pistol on the group. He then took Ben to the hospital. I'm honestly not sure if the cops were called on this, I'd assume yes, but even then Ben said his friend drove by Morgan's house a handful of times while he was in the hospital at random times and the car was never there. Karen stared at Ben for a bit before asking for the paperwork. Ben handed it to her and Karen had a smile form on her face. She then asked Ben for Morgan's phone number. Ben gave it, but wasn't aware of what was about to happen. Karen handed the phone to Karen Jr., who then dialed the number. Karen Jr. then began speaking to Morgan, telling her that they had met at one of the local clubs and wanted to know if she was down to party that night. Apparently, Morgan agreed and the plan was set. Brock parked his tow truck at the club and waited. Sure enough, Morgan showed up with a pink monster, parked it and went inside with some girlfriends. Brock gave them 5 minutes before he stealthily drove up to the car and hooked it up. As he was pulling out with the pink monster, Morgan walked out of the club. He saw her car in the tow truck and began trying to flag Brock down, but he was already out of there. The next day it was business as usual at the office when Morgan called. She was furious that her car was stolen by them and wanted it back. Karen, using her best customer service voice, told her if she had the registration, she could come pick it up. Morgan began screaming louder that she was gonna call the cops, at which point Karen sarcastically told her, "Please do," then hung up on her. As this phone call was going on, Brock happened to look out the window and saw Morgan standing next to a car in a vacant lot, throwing what appeared to be a temper tantrum. After Karen hung up, Brock watched her get in the car on the passenger seat. Karen then looked out the window and had Brock verify it was her, and she then began to smirk. Karen then proceeded to call the owner of the property Morgan and her friend were occupying. She told the owner about the car and asked if he wanted towed, and the owner okayed it. Brock then drove his truck over to the ladies in the car and introduced himself. They tried to explain that they were waiting for Morgan's boyfriend, but Brock insisted they weren't allowed to park there. They argued and called him every name in the book. Brock then hooked up their car and lifted it partially off the ground, forcing the two to exit the vehicle. They tore into him until he showed them the tow order. While this back and forth was going on, Ben arrived at the office and Morgan saw him walk in. She ran to the office door and Brock proceeded to lower the car. When Brock went back to the office, all hell had broken loose. Morgan apparently tried to snag the keys back from Ben, but he pocketed them. She began to hit him in his hurt arm and warned Ben that she'd call her friends to finish the job if she didn't get her keys back. Karen Jr. had already called the cops at this point, and Brock got in between Ben and Morgan, even telling Morgan to try hitting him to find out what would happen. Morgan then tried to play the pity card and said she only wanted the keys to get her laptop out for school. Karen asked Ben to hand the keys over to Brock so he could grab the laptop for her. Brock retrieved the laptop from the car, and as he was handing it over, she rushed to aggressively grab it, but knocked it from Brock's hand. Completely furious at this point, Morgan accused Brock of dropping the computer on purpose and threatened to sue. The cops then arrived and Morgan began her sob story again, telling the police that they stole her car. The police questioned Karen and Karen gave her casual smirk, while asking if they wanted to see the security footage. The police watched and listened as Morgan punched Ben several times and heard the threats she made about sending her friends after him. The police then turned to Morgan, who had turned ghost white at this point. She tried to back her way to the door, but the police stopped her. They proceeded to ask about the car, Ben's injuries, and who she planned on sending after him. She initially denied everything, but they already had evidence of her beating him up. She was arrested, and Ben got his car back. After the cops left, Ben admitted he didn't want to be seen in a car that looked like it was advertising Pepto-Bismol, and planned on trading it in for a GTO. We later heard through the grapevine that the 4 guys who beat up Ben were arrested as well. Morgan had ratted them out, of course. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.